welcome to webinar session number 3 today. Our panelists here today are David Bragg, and you guys may recognize him. He was on with us on Monday talking about a totally different topic. Today, we're going to spend some time talking with him about a new initiative they started in Bowling Green to help with the disposition process. But before we get into David Bragg, we're going to go to Shawn Henderson. And Shawn has prepared a small nugget. Hopefully I'm saying this right, Shawn. A small nugget of what you would present to your actual class live, paid class nonetheless. And for the people that are on here today watching this online, you're going to get this for no cost, but there'll be huge benefit to it. Was that a good intro, Shawn?
That'll do.
All right.
Well, hey, yeah, really kind of what I thought I would do today is we're taking a look at dispositions. So my goal was to try to distill what we teach on dispositions down into about 10 or 15 minutes. And the way today is going to look, I'm going to talk for about 10 or 15 minutes about dispositions in general. Then we're going to throw it to David Bragg, who's going to tell us about what he's doing in Bowling Green with respect to dispositions. But I think what we would like to do with most of the time today is just take questions from people who are online, maybe questions that you have about evidence disposition, and see if we can't get you some answers. It's a little tricky talking about evidence disposition because, I mean, not only does every 50 state different from the state next to it, but every county is different with respect to evidence disposition as well. So this is a difficult subject to tackle. We're going to do our best. I'm going to try to give you 15 minutes of something that you can take away, a reason for being here, and hopefully we will have used this hour productively and given you something to think about. So without any further ado, we'll just hit the ground running. For those of you who don't know me, and I don't know you because I can't see you, but I wanted to tell you just a little bit about me. I'm not just a homeless guy that grabbed a tie and a microphone and decided to hop on and talk about evidence. I've actually been in this industry for a while, and that's what I do. That's what I do with my time. That's what I do for a living. That's what I'm passionate about. But just to give you a little bit about me, I'm the executive director of the Evidence Management Institute. And we do training classes when there is no corona around, and we do consulting when there is no corona around. That's really our passion. That's our wheelhouse. But since we can't do that, we thought it would be great to just get on the interwebs and talk to you about evidence, because your jobs don't stop. I know that some of you are sheltering in place and not able to get to your place of business or work, but it's going to be there for you when you get back. We thought this would be a great time to take this opportunity and talk about some things that would be useful for you. It just makes sense. A little bit more about me. I'm also on the faculty of the Caruth Police Institute. That's a shared venture between the Dallas Police Department and the University of North Texas. I'm an adjunct instructor there. I teach leadership and whatever else they need me to teach. I'm retired from the Carrollton Police Department, which is a suburb just north of Dallas. I've been retired since July of 2018. It's been beautiful. I haven't shaved since, and that's really, for me, probably the happiest part of my existence. That's why you got the homeless Ron Swanson, Zach Galifianakis look going on, because I just can't bring myself to shave. I supervised the property and evidence unit and the crime scene unit while I was at Carrollton. So that's really where my passion began. I was on the board of directors of TAPE-IT, which is the Texas Association for Property and Evidence Inventory Technicians. And I was on the board of IAPE for a little while, which is the International Association for Property and Evidence, until I decided, hey, I want to do something different. I want to do this differently. I want to get out on my own. And that's why I'm here today, and that's what I'm doing today. Just to kind of throw in there, I was also a former assistant principal and a teacher, middle school teacher. So if I've got any spelling errors or grammatical errors in my presentation, please let me know. It will hurt my feelings, but that's okay. But if you really want to know about me, a little bit more about me, this is my family. They've already given me permission to share. That's me when I had less hair. And those are my girls, Abby and Avery. They are also on lockdown, so it is Casa de Estrogen at the Henderson household, and that's why I'm in the office by myself today for a little bit of peace and tranquility. So we'll start the timer right now. The 10 minutes begins now. This is a 10-minute guide to evidence disposition. That's the goal here, and I'll try to pay attention to the time as I go. Today we're going to focus on 4 things. We're going to give you a quick overview of the evidence disposition process. We'll tell you what you need to know about disposition ratios, or why you need to know your own evidence disposition ratio. I'm also going to make a case for officers being involved with researching and approving dispositions. I know that this is an issue that a lot of agencies deal with. Hopefully, I'm going to give you some things that you can think about, bring back to your chief, and use as an argument in favor of getting officers involved in the process. And we'll also give you some disposition resources that you can use. One of the cool things about the Facebook page, the community group, I'm still reluctant to be a part of the Facebook world, but I do see its merits. You can share a lot of great information on there. There's already been some great information. I think the last post, James McNally showed a video evidence packaging manual that gave step-by-step video instructions. It was right there and available for the officers. That's really cool. That's something that you might not otherwise know about unless you hopped on a forum with other evidence managers. And we're going to share some resources for you today, some things that we talk about in our training this afternoon that'll be available on that page. Give you a reason to go there because there's valuable information there. It's always good to get evidence custodians in the same place talking about evidence management. That's how change happens. That's how we improve.
While you take a sip there, Shawn, that was a great intro to allow me to hop in. I just wanted to let you know James Nally is who posted it, and I've already asked him if we can actually get the produced video that they put together. So he said they were producing it. I'm trying to get the produced video to go on here so that people can see what they put together. And James, in the question window, I don't know what agency you're with. So if you wouldn't mind posting in the question answer window or the chat window, let me know who you're with. That way I'm proliferating out the right information here today.
Yeah, and I think that's the huge value of a community forum that's active and people are involved with. And there's no better time to start that when we're all sequestered. I know that I was planning on being in Chicago at a conference and teaching at a conference. That had to be put off. So the opportunities have moved online, and we're just trying to make a space where people can get together and share ideas. A few fun facts about evidence disposition. In most agencies, you'll find, and this is universal, between 50 and 80% of the stuff that you have stored in your evidence room is eligible for disposal. Now, there are obviously probably going to be some agencies that are a little different. If you're more efficient with evidence disposition, your numbers are going to be lower. But in almost every agency, just generally, 50 to 80% of the stuff that we store is eligible for disposal. On average, it takes about 30 minutes of time to dispose of a piece of evidence. When you look at time in aggregate, the amount of time it takes to find the item, to research the eligibility, to get the documentation, to actually physically dispose the item, we use a number of 30 minutes per item to give you an idea of how long it takes to dispose of a piece of evidence. Evidence, the third point, is probably the single most vulnerable evidence type in your evidence room when it comes to liability or exposure to liability for something being lost, damaged, stolen, misappropriated. It's the stuff that is being prepared for disposition that you're most vulnerable for in terms of losing that evidence. And the last fact, and this was also scientifically proven, the efficient disposition of evidence has been scientifically proven to lower blood pressure and reduce hair loss for evidence custodians. I didn't know that. I read that today on an internet thing, and so it's got to be true. It wasn't in time for me, unfortunately, but for those of you out there with hair, this is something you should pay attention to. So why is evidence disposition such a big deal? Evidence disposition, disposing of evidence efficiently, effectively, and sustainably is a big deal because it's related to the two most critical commodities in evidence management. That's time and space. We are always in a war against the laws of physics. We never seem to have enough time to do the things that we need to do, and we can run out of space if we don't manage our evidence efficiently. Evidence disposition is directly related and directly correlated to those two commodities, and that's why we spend time. That's why we talk about it. just to talk a little bit about the disposition process so that we're all on the same page. And again, if you've got questions, we're going to spend the last half of this webinar answering questions. So we're going to run pretty fast through this. This is not intended to be exhaustive or inclusive. It's intended to just kind of give you a quick overview. The disposition process begins with eligibility, and then there's identification, research, notification, authorization, and physical disposal of the evidence. There's so much that goes involved or that goes into disposing of a piece of evidence. Most people outside of evidence management never think about that. We're going to hit the high points of each one because they're different for every agency. When we're talking about eligibility, we're just trying to figure out if this piece of evidence, if it's eligible for us to get it out of our property room. And eligibility is contingent on probably 4 different factors. It is more important that we retain evidence for the duration of its required custody than we dispose of evidence. We never want to get rid of a piece of evidence before it's eligible. That is a miscarriage of justice and not what we want to be in the business of. But it is really important that as soon as that is ready to be disposed of, that we get on it and we get it out of our room because we don't need it anymore. That's going to be based on case adjudication, the time of appeals or the sentence of the offender if they're incarcerated, certain limitation statutes. And it's interesting, David is going to bring this up. One of the things that Kentucky faces is that and correct me if I'm wrong, David, there's no limitation statute for felony offenses in Kentucky. In Texas, it's 3 years unless it's otherwise specified. But that's something that, I mean, from state to state, everyone deals with different issues with respect to evidence disposition. So the key concept for eligibility, we want to retain it as long as we need it, but we want to get it out of our room as soon as possible. And when it comes to identification, most of us, and this is how I spent my time as an evidence manager at the beginning of my career, is I would walk around my evidence room and I would find large pieces of evidence that looked old. And then I would write all those numbers down and I would take them back to my desk and I would research those items and see if I could get rid of them. That is a completely inefficient way of doing business, but it's the way a lot of us do business if we don't have a better substitute. My preference, the thing that I preach, is automation. We ought to have the ability to have that information pushed to us. We can index, we know the general limitation times or the general retention times for most evidence. Having that automated, that way you're not walking around your property room and having that that little pen and paper experience, but having that information pushed to you is critical. If you can't dispose of evidence efficiently if you don't have an efficient system to identify eligible evidence. So moving on, and I realize this is fast, the research process, this is critical. The key concept here is we've got to define what we're researching, what the requirements for disposing of evidence are. That can be based on the adjudication of the case. That can be based on the statute of limitations. It can be an administrative procedure where you're just allowed to dispose of evidence if you've got backing and the support of your municipal court or your local courts of record and your administration. But there is some level of research involved with every piece of evidence to make sure that it's eligible. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of disposing of evidence that wasn't eligible for disposition. And I am not proud of this fact, but I have thrown away evidence that was related to an active federal case. Now, you might think that was just a bad experience. Let me just tell you that was bad and uncomfortable. What happened was we had a state case that was adjudicated. We didn't have a culture or a practice. Our officers and investigators weren't involved in researching cases. So when that state case went away, we decided that we would get rid of the evidence. That's one of the key reasons why we've involved officers, or why we believe that involving officers in the disposition process is so important, is because of issues like that. So documenting your findings is absolutely critical. We'll run through notification. Notification, I mean, you have to get this information into the hands of the people that are eligible or that are authorized to make decisions. That might be the officer or the investigator that's related to the case. That might be the court if you have to get court notifications. It might be the owner of the property if you're returning the property back to the owner. It's not the notification at this stage that's critical. The critical thing is getting the response. It is easy to send out 100 emails, but if you send out 100 emails and you don't get 100 responses, then your notification system is not as efficient as it could be. And authorization, this is key. The key concept here, and I know that we're all in the same boat and we're all on the same page with most of this, but the most important thing about the disposition process is that evidence custodians shouldn't be in the business of authorizing and approving the disposition of evidence. If we talk about nothing else today, that's probably the most important feature about evidence disposition that needs to change across the country is evidence custodians shouldn't be responsible for authorizing and approving the disposition of evidence. We need a system of checks and balances in order to make sure that we make the right decision, and that's not us. That's not our wheelhouse. That's not our responsibility.
And on a side note, that's exactly what David Bragg is going to focus on today. When we go over to him in just a minute, that authorization process is what he went about trying to do something very different.
Exactly. And the last piece of the puzzle is that blessed, glorious day when you burn that stuff or send it to the incinerator or put it in the trash can, when you physically dispose of the evidence. We will have more opportunities to talk about evidence disposition and be able to do more breakouts with respect to physical disposition of evidence and different ways and methods and things to think about with respect to physical destruction of evidence. But the most important concept when it comes to physically disposing of evidence is that you never mark it disposed until it's actually disposed. I can't tell you how many times I've been in property rooms doing audits or doing work in my own property room. We would constantly find items that were marked disposed. Well, if they were marked disposed, but they weren't in the trash, then something went wrong. And the thing that goes wrong is when we mark them disposed before we dispose of them. That happens, and that causes problems for us. So that was a quick overview of the disposition process. Really quick, I want to talk to you about disposition ratios. One of the things that David brought up on the last webinar was his use of data, and he used data to use that as a driver to allow him to help his agency make better decisions with respect to their evidence. One of the key performance indicators that you should be using is your intake to disposition ratio. And I'm going to show you a couple of things that you can do with a disposition ratio, things that you can do that'll help you. But the ideal disposition ratio is one item comes in and one item goes out. And that's a theoretical number. Most of us don't get there. There are agencies that do, but that's really the most sustainable number is a 1-to-1 ratio. I would contest, or I would say that the minimum effective ratio is 1 to 0.75. If you take in one item and you dispose of 0.75 items, or if you take in 4 items and you dispose of 3 items every year, you're going to be sustainable for quite a while. And I'll show you the math here next. So when it comes to evidence dispositions and disposition ratios, if you look here at the top of the screen, that's a 1-to-1 ratio. In 2020, we brought in 8,000 items, or no, we took in 1,000 items and we disposed of 1,000 items. And at the end of 5 years or 6 years later, at a 1-to-1 disposition ratio, we still have the same amount of items that we started with. That's what a 1-to-1 disposition ratio gets you. And if we start at 80% of our capacity, let's look just for our purposes today, this room, they were 80% full when they started. At a 1-to-1 disposition ratio, 6 years later, they were at 80%. So that's a sustainable number. At a 0.75 ratio, there were 8,000 items in their property room. They took in 1,000 items. They disposed of 750 items. And you can see over time, it builds up, and the capacity of their agency or their evidence storage facility builds up. Oh, let me go back. Over time, but they went from 80 to 8,250 items to 9,500 items at the end of 6 years. And that's a slow buildup. But when you look at agencies on this next page, where it's one item coming in, a half an item going out, in 4 years, they're going to be at 100% capacity. I mean, you can predict these things mathematically if you know your disposition rate, if you know the numbers that you take in every year and the numbers that you dispose of every year. You can make good predictions based on math, based on data, to take back to your agency and give them this information. If we don't do something, if something doesn't change, then we're going to reach capacity in 4 years. Or at 0.25, we're going to reach capacity in 3 years. If we do nothing different, then we're going to fill up and we're not going to be able to store more evidence because we've run out of room. That's just one of the things that a disposition ratio can do for you. It's important to know this information. It's important to have this information. And that's why we like to include it. So I want to talk next really quick about why officers and investigators need to be involved in researching and approving evidence dispositions. When you look at one of the main failure points for evidence disposition, it's a little funnel. If you've got an agency with 50 officers and you've got one person doing all the research for evidence disposition, all of that work falls into one little funnel. And it's that stopping point that really chokes your ability to identify evidence, to research evidence, to notify owners, and to get those appropriate authorizations. If it's one person doing that work, then that's where everything stops down. If you're pouring a pitcher of water into another container, if you're pouring it through a funnel, it's going to choke down at that narrowest point. That's why we want to encourage you to use a pitcher. Have officers and investigators involved in that process. Because it just makes it more efficient. I mean, we're always against a time crunch when it comes to evidence management. If you got a 50-person department, we know that disposing of 1,000 items is going to take about 12 and a half weeks of time. Just 40 hours a week, 12 and a half weeks, 1,000 items. It's going to take a lot of time to get rid of that evidence. One evidence custodian has 48 weeks in a year. So that's basically 25% of that evidence custodian's time. But if you widen that net out and look at the time available to the entire agency, we're not even talking about 1,000% of their time or 100% of their time with respect to their normal operating day. So if you're thinking about bringing this up to your chief or to an executive and trying to get officers more involved in the process, most of the time, police chiefs, chief executives are reluctant to add more responsibilities to their officers' plates, especially for patrol and investigations. They just don't want to do that. But I would like to make one quick case, one business case that you can bring up to a chief that maybe will resonate with them a little differently. You can show them a chart like I've just showed you. They won't care. You can tell them that the sky is falling and you're running out of room. They might not care. But there are 3 really good business reasons for having officers involved in the process. And one is quality control. I have found that when I bring this up to chiefs and I tell them officers need to be involved in evidence disposition, research, and authorization, because there's no quality control at your agency. If you've got a police officer that files 10 DWI cases or 10 dope cases in a year, but he has no idea how any of those cases were adjudicated, then that officer has no idea what the quality of his work is. And by having them involved in the disposition process, they research their own cases. They know how they're disposed. They know how effective they are as officers. Number 2 is liability. It is a liability exposure for us to not dispose of evidence effectively or efficiently. That opens us up to liability that we don't need. That's another great way to speak to chiefs because they respond to liability. They respond to quality control. And at last, if you can't succeed, just use physics. 3 years, chief, we'll run out of space. I don't know where you want to put it, but in 3 years, you're going to have to make that decision. Now, if your chief is retiring next year, that's probably not a good. That's not probably not a good argument, but it might work. So I'm going to cut off my time here. I'm going to tell you about 3 things that we're going to put on the Facebook community page. What's the name of it, Ben? Facebook's. I think you're muted.
Sorry. It's in the chat window. If you go to the chat window, go to our webinar window, there's a link to the group page, and you can go in there and request membership.
All right. Well, I'm going to put three kind of fun things on there for you to use. One is a link to our evidence management standards and best practices. That's also available on our website if you don't want to follow the link. But I'm also going to post a sample evidence disposition policy. This is something that you can use as an agency just to look at your own policies. You might see something that you might be able to take back and use or change in your own policies. But I'm also going to include an evidence disposition research guide or a disposition research procedure. Your agency is going to be different. You're not going to be able to use the same procedures, but you can look at the same process and use the same process. So hopefully that'll be of some use to you. If you have questions, give me a call, send me an email. I'd be happy to answer them, but we're going to go ahead and shift over to uh, some things that David Bragg is trying to do at the Bowling Green Police Department in Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Let me throw one thing out very quickly. I did get a question from CJ, and it is a really, really good question. I'm going to bring that up, CJ, when David is done talking, because it's a fantastic question that definitely needs to be answered. Shawn, I need to grab control here on my screen. Let me switch this, because I'm going to show off my screen here. Excellent. All right, David, the floor. David, I'm thrilled that you're going to be talking about the subject you are today. One of the hardest things to do as I lead into what David's going to talk about is making change, doing something different. You want to create all sorts of chaos in your world or people around you. Simply suggest doing something differently. And, it is really hard to get people to consider doing something differently. But when you consider what Shawn said as he went along his entire presentation, I would say if we took a poll of the people that are in the crowd here today and asked them, are you effectively maintaining a 1-to-1 or even a 1 to 0.75 or whatever, I think you're going to find out most people would unanimously say, I'm having disposition problems. I'm not getting buy-in from my agency. The courts are lagging multiple years. What do we do? And so what we've got here today with David taking the floor and starting to talk is what I believe something that is very, very different for you to consider. But we would also love to hear back from you guys as to what you're doing. If there are other success stories that are out there, put it on that Facebook community group page so that everybody can participate in the success. Or even if you're just having problems, that's a great place to go to get access to these. So David, please take the floor and share with us what it is you're doing to make significant change in Bowling Green.
Yeah. Hey, first of all, at the conclusion of this, remind me, I want to ask a question to everybody viewing out there and get a response from them, maybe on the community forum, that I need to tackle myself, that I'm having some difficulty with. So remind me on that. To give you a little bit of background, and I don't know if my connection is choppy or not. Are you hearing me okay?
I'm hearing you okay, but your video did stop. And so I maybe pause your video and restart it because you cut out there a little bit earlier, but we're at least hearing you. So I'm willing to roll along with hearing you because I've got the display stuff on my end ready to go.
Okay, all right, good. Hey, I'm serving a municipal police department of with 125 officers, about a 70,000 population. The county's about 130,000. We're just 60 miles north of Nashville, to give you an idea. So here are some problems I'm going to throw out to you that we've encountered that interfered with our purging or disposition process. So here in Kentucky, we have two divisions of criminal court. We have a district court division, which handles misdemeanors and traffic cases. Then we have a circuit court division, which handles all felony cases. Now, within my district court of handling misdemeanors.
Hold on one second. Hey, David. David, I'm going to put you on mute for a second. Go ahead and turn your video off because it is bouncing in and out. So just go ahead and turn the video off and we'll just listen to you.
To deal with.
All right. There's in your go-to chat. There we go. I think we'll have a much better success here if we just have the audio. Are you still there, David?
Yes, I am. Yeah. Can you hear me?
You're coming through now, so go ahead and fire away.
Hello. Yeah, so here's, I kind of give you a picture of the court system. We got 3 district judges within our misdemeanor courts, and we have 2 circuit judges within our felony courts. And each of those courts have an elected prosecutor who operate autonomously, so they're not connected with each other. So that poses a problem, and you don't have one prosecutor's office to go through. We're dealing with 2 prosecutors' offices. Our misdemeanor evidence is not an issue, and I'll tell you how we address that and how we overcame that problem. But our felony evidence has been a problem of getting dispositions from the court. We, as Shawn mentioned, in Kentucky, we have no statute of limitations. So if you have a bicycle that's worth $500 and it's stolen, that's a felony. So, you can prosecute that case 30 years from now, and that's a problem addressing disposition purging of felony evidence. In my own department, we had a problem with, I would say our disposition policy was inadequate. So we had to address that issue. We currently send out paper disposition forms to the officer once a year. So they get that once a year, and if you've got 500 pieces of evidence in maybe 200 or 300 cases, you've got to research all of those. Well, the officers were doing that research. They were sending over a request to our prosecutor that works felony cases, and they would sit over there for years. The officer would get that disposition sheet the next year and address the same thing that he previously had done. So that was causing a big headache for us. We just weren't not getting any dispositions at all. So, and I don't know, you got some pictures there, Ben, of my evidence room. We really have, we have adequate storage. We just have inadequate purging process. And that's been our big problem. So if you throw up a graph, I don't know if these are probably a repeat for some, but yeah, there you go. And that's the construction project we've got going on. So you go to the next graph there, Ben, if you've got one.
Yep, there's your intake versus your disposal.
There you go. So that's sort of the ratio that Shawn was talking about. At least it kind of gives you a picture. Now, if you look at those first 4 years there on that graph from 2015 on up to 2018, that's a big problem. We're not getting rid of things. It picked up a little bit in 2019. Go to the next graph. Our intake is on a steady climb. Ignore that one drop where it took a dip because we did some things where we're not storing body cams and car cams. So that took a dip. But that graph is constantly going up. We're not getting rid of stuff. So what we're going to do, we're going to run out of space. And we had predicted that in 2019. So how do we get rid of this stuff? Well, I'm going to address the misdemeanor part of it first. About 7 years ago, we brought our prosecutor that handles misdemeanor cases into our evidence room and said, look, here's our problem. And we showed her some of these graphs and charts that we have. We got to have some relief. We can't continue doing this. She agreed. She was kind of astonished at what we were sitting on. We were sitting on misdemeanor evidence that were probably 6, 7 years old. And we've got a 1-year statute of limitations for prosecution of those. So in talking to her, she came up with the idea, and I had kind of thrown this out to her if this was possible, and she agreed it was. It's, look, can you draft an administrative order that is very broad? It's not case specific. Draft administrative order, ask the judges if they would consider signing that administrative order, giving the department, giving officers the authorization to dispose of misdemeanor evidence 90 days post adjudication date, and that would give the defendant opportunity time to file an appeal if needed. And the judges are on board with that. This relieved the prosecutor, the prosecutor's office from getting those masses of requests for court orders for purging, for dispositions. So the judges agreed to sign that. That's been in order since 2013, and we essentially don't keep misdemeanor evidence more than a year. So once that case is adjudicated, 90 days, it's eligible to be disposed of. Now, here's the problem right now. It's not really a problem. We still get rid of it. But this disposition sheet goes out once a year. So we're still sitting on that for a little bit of time. But we've got a cure, I think, in place to address that coming up. So we've handled that, and this has really eliminated the need to sit on all this misdemeanor evidence. Now, our felony evidence with the circuit courts is a different matter. We've battled that for several years. We've actually met with the prosecutor a number of times, and I suspect a lot of people, a lot of agencies are in the same boat that we are. It's your evidence. The prosecutor doesn't have to sit on it, doesn't have to store it, doesn't have to look at it, doesn't have to come up with creative ways on how to store that and handle that or possibly build out. So it's not affecting his budget any at all. And it kind of takes a back seat, I think, with a lot of prosecutors. But we brought our prosecutor in that handles those cases in circuit court. And we pretty much said we have to have some relief, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to do it. We want your blessing. And we have a good working relationship with him. But we were kind of giving him an ultimatum, is that we can't continue this. It's going to break. You know, we got to do something with it. So this is what we came up with. On those cases, and that's most cases we find in our circuit court, on final sentencing date, our cadet program, we have a cadet program. They're mostly college students who have been paid. There's probably 7 or 8 of those cadets. So our prosecutor's office has agreed that on final sentencing date for a defendant, they will send that court docket to the cadets. Cadets will get a list of evidence that's involved in that particular case and forward it to the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor's office will now do either a destruction or a forfeiture order, whatever the case may be. The defense attorney will get a copy of that prior to the final sentencing court date. And then when they meet on final sentencing before the judge, everybody's on board with this. Defense counsel signs the order. The Commonwealth attorney representing the state will sign it, and the judge will issue the order immediately. And we started seeing that flowing really effective. It's been in existence for about a month, and we were getting orders every day coming from their clerk's office where these orders were being issued during final sentencing. And then this COVID-19 hit, shut down our courts, and it kind of slowed up, and now we're in a holding pattern. So that looks promising in itself. I think what you're looking at there, yeah, you're looking at this is a sample court order that Ben has up there. And in that court order, you'll see that the court has authorized the destruction of this no earlier than 60 days from the filing date of this court order. Now, the reason they put that in there, and I've redacted the name, the reason they put that in there, it gives the defendant enough time to file an appeal or withdraw a plea if they so desire. So that in itself is very promising, because we've seen a ton of these starting to come in. So that has a lot of potential, and we're in the early phase of it. I'm holding my breath that this will continue. Our prosecutor says yes, he's on board with it. He wants to do this, and he wants to continue with it. And I think he will. So here's what else we're looking at. Auto disposition. Now, we'll see on some of these charts here, particularly if you'll go back to, well, it probably doesn't show it on here, but if you're a user of SAFE, then you'll see kind of a ratio chart that's built into SAFE that shows your collection and your disposal. So we kind of follow that wave. And what happens with ours is we have periods of spiking, and that spiking indicates to us that we're primarily focusing on purging maybe one time a year or twice a year. So you have that big spike of of stuff going out of your evidence room. And what Shawn was talking about, if you could keep this consistent, like one-on-one coming through, then that would really eliminate. I don't know. That's not mine there, is it, Ben?
No, I'm bringing it up. Give me 1 second. I'm bringing that up. But you can keep talking.
So if you see that chart there, there's mine. So you see that we've had periods of spiking in that chart to indicate that we're doing purging in waves. And what Shawn was talking about, if you could do that one-on-one, which we're not there yet, but we're trying to get there by implementing some of these solutions, then we hope to see that that's sort of a one-on-one or close to a one-on-one throughout the year. That's a 12-month period there.
Hey, David, if you were to look at all of our clients and look at all of their disposition graphs, for the people that are doing dispositions, what I generally see is there are these large spikes, because what most people are doing is what you are doing. You send out a large packet of requests, you get it all back at once. Now you're geared up to do disposition. But while the problem for the last month, you were getting them coming in, a little more frequently. We just didn't have enough time to see how this graph was going to look, maybe over a year's period of time with that being implemented. Based on what you're telling me, I believe if we had a year's worth of that working, that line would flatten out a little bit more versus these large spikes.
Yeah, well, that's what we're striving to do. And I think by implementing this cadet program where, the common attorney sending these final sentencing dockets over, that will help. Another thing is we're going to look at, and the chief's already given our nod for auto disposition, but again, COVID-19 hit and that put everything on the back burner. But I think that will eliminate the problem. The problem with using paper too is that you get those purges once a year, but also on the flip side is when you have 125 officers working on dispositions all at once, the prosecutor's office gets flooded with these requests. And it's like throwing a breaker switch. Man, they got kind of shut down. We can't handle all this coming in at once. So what happens? It gets pushed to the back burner. Well, they'll try to address it in the future. And then we're back in that revolving door where now next year the officers are addressing the same things they had done the previous year. The prosecutor's office getting the same thing that they had gotten the previous year, and they won't work. I mean, it just won't work.
Yeah.
Auto disposition, I think, will help solve that issue as well. I think, Ben, I heard from Des Moines maybe that when Des Moines implemented auto disposition, they were disposing of so much evidence it almost became scary. I don't know if that's an accurate picture or not, but
that was actually
that's where I
was gonna say that was many years ago. My contact at Omaha said that they went from doing no disposition to doing a record amount of disposition, and it actually, he said it became scary the way they were getting rid of it. But I think the critical component of what you said is that breaker, sort of throwing the breaker, or even what Shawn said is when you go to your court or DA or whomever and you throw down this massive list of paperwork, that's sitting there on their desk and they've got other works to do. I love how you built it into just the normal court process, and to get them to buy in and say, hey, I won't bring that big, large stack of papers and just toss it on your desk if we can just build it into the process. So I do have questions rolling in. Shawn, are you going to hop back on here? Because I have questions that either Shawn or David can answer. The main one I'm getting, and David, is it okay? Can we post these court orders, or even if you have the Word documents for them? I'm guessing there are people out there that would love to have this so that they can go to somebody else and say, hey, this was being done elsewhere. Can we post these out on that chat group?
Yeah, I mean, you could go to the clerk's office actually and look it up and get copies of it. So yeah, feel free to do that. I've redacted the name on that one court order.
Okay. Well, and I'll tell you, if if I can get a Word document out of you all, so you and I will work that out and we'll get that posted. So for everybody else, yes, we're going to post that on the community forum page where you can download the copies of these court orders. I'll have these PDF copies to where you can get the originals from the Warren Circuit Court, but we'll also have just a Word document so that you'll have a template if you want to start using it. Okay.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned being a selling point for the prosecutor's office, which you're right, and we presented this to them, is it not only is it going to provide relief to us, but this is going to provide relief to your office that you're not getting, a dump truck of a request being dumped on your desk, so it'll be much more consistent. So
I think another important part of what you said is bring them down to your office and have those statistical graphs that say, we are running out of space. I'm going to give you a rough estimate as to when we are going to be out of space. And, when you get people sitting at the table and you're giving them statistical data that says this is the date it's going to happen, it's going to be a lot harder to say, no, we're not going to do anything about it, because there's going to come a day where this is going to become a real problem. So, all right, well, I have some more questions here to throw out. The first one that was asked by CJ is, what happens when you don't have the time or your agency doesn't see the importance of giving time for this? That's a really hard question to answer. Let me throw that to Shawn. What happens when your agency simply says, we don't have the time for this?
I think that's probably one of the $1 million questions related to evidence management. And there are some, things that I recommend is you've got to be able to change that narrative. And there are a couple of ways that you can do that. One of the things that we talk about extensively in class is, there's no shortage of problems in evidence management. So we've got to start figuring out what the solutions are. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to start communicating your problems mathematically. Communicate them in the language of management, communicate them in ways that chief executives and commanders understand, and they understand the language of liability. They understand if you can attach a liability to an issue and bring that to your chief executive in a way that helps him understand what the agency's liability is for failure to comply, then that helps them make a decision. I think one of the best tools that I've been able to use, and I was able to employ this successfully at Carrollton PD, and I've heard from others that this is a successful strategy, is really speaking math to them. When you can quantify the problem, you can give them something that they can work on. We're always in a battle for resources, whether that's time or money or space. We're always competing for resources. In order to kind of tip the scales in your favor, you've got to be able to quantify the issue. You can't just tell your chief, man, we're not able to dispose of evidence. It's terrible. It's just piling up. But if you can tell them mathematically, we have 80,406 items in our property room. We are at 85% capacity for storage. We have 15% of our capacity left. We're going to be out of space completely in 3 years if nothing changes. Then that translates the equation one into language that they can understand. It's objective, and it also puts them back on you. So those are a couple of suggestions, and I know that those aren't exhaustive, but hopefully that's a place to start.
And I would say, listen, another reality of the world is that you're probably in most cases not going to get more resources. And so, the biggest question I'd have is what are you doing with your time? And not that you're doing invalid things with your time, but I would want to sit down and look at that maybe from like what Shawn would do, an audit perspective, and say, okay, listen, we have to come up with time somewhere to work on these things. What's the best balance to strike? Like maybe there's something in your week that's taking a significant amount of time that you could offload elsewhere and spend more time focusing on these types of activities. Sorry, David, did you have something to jump in there with?
Yeah, Shawn's exactly right. I think it's 3 years ago, I was looking at the data. I do a year, for people who are on here Monday, I do a year-end analysis of, it's kind of a snapshot of what our evidence room looks like with commentary, and I present it. So 3 years ago, I was telling them, look, come the end of 2019, we're going to probably reach maximum capacity of storage. So we're going to have to, something's got to give. And they recognize that, but they were looking at the data, just exactly what Shawn was saying. You just can't say it. You got to show it to them. You really have to show it to them. And that's what these charts did. They agreed, actually. So that's the reason they're giving a nod on the auto disposition. They gave the nod on meeting with the prosecutors to say, look, you got to provide us some relief. A third thing that happened actually was we have a off-site, off our campus grounds or whatever you want to call it, a bulk storage facility, handle big items, power tools, bikes, and lawnmowers, those kinds of things. So, and that really was inadequate storage. But we used these charts, and the chief used this data with other supporting data to convince our board of commissioners to build us a new bulk storage facility with 10 car bays that we can now park vehicles in. It's 2 stories. So that opened up some avenues. And you still have to purge because you could fill that up if you're not careful. But at least knowing your data, you open up some avenues that brought us some relief elsewhere.
Okay, so we've got less than 10 minutes left, so your answers are going to have to be rapid fire now. If you talk more than 30 seconds on these answers, I'm going to cut you off, okay? You ready for that?
That's it.
All right.
Okay. All right.
And I'm just going rapid fire on these. Either one of you can jump in. Does your laboratory section analyze all cases with a suspect? Misdemeanor drug cases as well as felonies? Either one of you have a comment?
Yeah, our state, we have a state laboratory where all the forensic evidence, or all the evidence is sent for forensic analysis. They will rarely do any misdemeanor cases involving laboratory analysis.
Okay.
Rarely.
If it's a felony, do they ultimately hold on to that evidence, or does it come back to you?
Comes back to me.
Okay, so then it goes back to your process.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've got here, and I didn't really understand how it said, did you have a meeting with PA and judges to get judge on board? Is PA, what's PA stand for? Prosecutor?
Probably prosecuting attorney.
Prosecuting attorney, sorry. Okay, so did you have a meeting? So David, did you have a meeting with the prosecuting attorney and judges to get judge on board?
We did the prosecutor, we did not the judges.
Okay, so prosecutor.
So the prosecutor.
Judges,
Yeah.
Okay. All right. How do you dispose of biohazard items, excluding sexual assault kits?
Incineration in an approved EPA facility.
Yeah, we actually, every 8 weeks, we have a licensed biohazard waste disposal company that comes by and picks up our waste. So just like they do at hospitals and physician's office.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing you can do is try to coordinate with a local hospital or paramedics. I mean, those disposal companies are expensive, but if you can get an agreement with a county hospital or health organization, sometimes they can handle those dispositions for you.
Excellent. Is the court order to dispose used for smaller jurisdictions? At our agency, we've been given the authority to dispose of property across the board just by officer detective disposition after an item has been deemed no longer evidence.
As long as you have that written in policy, and I mean written in policy as in it's there in words, that you can have to support you when you make a decision, then I'm not recommending court orders for disposition of all evidence. It really varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. The most important thing for you in that situation would be make sure that your policy protects you and authorizes you specifically to do the things that you're asked to do.
So Raymond, specifically a question for you. Raymond Santucci is the one who posted that. I hope you're in our community forum. I'm sure people would love to see what your policy is or whatever's written on that. Please post that out if that's something you have the ability to do. Okay. Next question. In my agency, we research cases for eligibility prior to getting permission from the deputies and SAO. Is there structured training available anywhere that instructs on how to accurately interpret statutes and possible extensions to SOL? a clearer understanding
short-
will prevent
yeah.
holding on to things unnecessarily. I do realize laws differ from state to state. I hope that made sense to you.
The short answer is no. But I will tell you, one of the things that we're going to post on that community forum is a case research guide, just to use as an example. I would, when it comes to matters of law and interpretation of law, I would run any policy that you draft through your prosecuting attorney's office, through the courts. If you've got a relationship with the prosecutor, have them look at it. Make sure that your agency signs off, but we're going to post a sample procedure for researching cases on that community forum that you can use and model specifically your practices. You can base your practices on that and then change it to meet how your agency does business. But that's one of the things that we want to make sure that we do is we educate people on how to research cases. Officers know how to do it because they understand adjudications and they understand case filing, but a lot of times we're asking civilians to do this with no training, and there's no background or backbone training piece that can make that all come together. We're going to post that, and tell us what you think.
Hey, if you don't have go ahead, David.
Now, here's a question for Shawn and a comment. In researching cases, I don't know if a lot of agencies have an online capability of researching the case. That perhaps they do. Kentucky operates the Kentucky Administrative Office of Courts operates a portal that is available to law enforcement. You can log on, look at the particular docket, look at the adjudication dates, the sentencing, and so forth. So they don't physically have to go to their justice center to research these cases or call up the prosecutor's office. So, I mean, if your state's not using it or you don't know if it exists, I would find out if that capability exists, because you don't have to leave your office to do that.
Yeah, more and more county courts and state courts are going online with their records. I know we've benefited from that in our area. I know that there are some small counties in Texas that don't have that capacity, but I think you're going to find that more and more often that all those records are online.
So another real quick plug for the Facebook. Maybe you don't have accounts for this. I just want you to know somebody just posted on here not too long ago a question about this. Somebody used Central Square Records Management System, had a question about it. Somebody else responded to it. That is the purpose of the forum, is that you've got a place to go when it's specifically related to evidence management systems. This is a place you guys can go and talk with each other, and that's exactly how that's supposed to work right there. So maybe you don't have a Facebook account, just go set one up, make it a work account, just put your picture on there. You don't have to put a lot of information, and just use it for the work process of going in and getting these documents. I'm telling you, this is going to build up into a large hub of very valuable information that when you're looking for things, policies, procedures, documents. I saw somebody on here, I think somebody has posted some disposition stuff. So I'm telling you, this thing is gonna grow very rapidly and be a great place to go to when you need to ask questions or comments about it. And if you don't know where it's at, there in the chat window, there is a link to it in the chat window of this. If you don't see that, then post a question in here and I'll send it back. A couple more quick questions. Does the prosecuting attorney make that order? I get disposition from prosecuting attorney and then type up a destruction order. Very inefficient.
No, the prosecutors does it.
Yeah,
it comes from the prosecutor's office.
I will say one fun thing that you can do if you can get everybody on the same page. In Denton County, which is a county north of Dallas, they've kind of arranged it to where at the end, when every case is adjudicated, part of the prosecutor's packet that goes into that adjudication is also a destruction order. So that's something that you can talk to your courts about. Just make that part and parcel of their adjudication and paperwork process, and that could work very nicely for you as well.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
I got one more question here at the bottom. It says, do you ever find that officers don't want to get rid of anything, or officers that will, let me look around, or officers who just say get rid of it all? Yes. As a former police officer, and I was the worst among offenders before I became the supervisor of the evidence unit at the Carrollton Police Department, I was that officer. I apologize now profusely for that, but I was the worst. And you really have to make this the officer's problem. The first thing to do is make it their responsibility in policy. Make it their responsibility in policy, and then you have some teeth. You have some backing, but that policy has to be very specific. Officers are generally going to fall into one of those two camps. Either the submit it and forget it, I don't care, do whatever you want, get rid of it all, or no, we have to keep that forever because it's part of my little museum of horrors of this city. And both of those are wrong. So you have to write in your policy that we get rid of evidence, we dispose of evidence when it is appropriate, and when the required retention period has expired, we dispose of evidence. You have to define what that is and then give your officers very specific responsibilities.
I have a note on here, Shawn, where somebody said, and I agree with this, if officers are allowed to keep items, they must get a supervisor permission on that or something to that effect. So again, you can't just blanket, hey, we're going to keep everything, I don't want to deal with it. You're going to force them at least the pain of having to go to somebody else and get a sign off on that.
Definitely. You want to make those things painful. I mean, police officers respond to pain. That's just a natural, that's a fact. I wish it weren't true. I wish it weren't true of me when I was in that stage. But yeah, you definitely have to, in order to just keep them from arbitrarily doing things that are the path of least resistance, you have to give them some resistance.
And I would say a side benefit, I don't know if there's anybody on here that would want to claim this, but I've actually heard that when you kick up this disposition process and get them more involved, it actually has a benefit on the intake, because now all of a sudden they're a little more judicious on how the intake is going to look, because they know this stuff is going to come back. If right now the order is it goes into that black hole somewhere in the evidence room and I never see it again, there is no pain on them. Get them involved in the process. They know it's going to come back. That may have an impact on what's coming in the door too.
Yeah, the best evidence to dispose of is that stuff that never came in to begin with. That
That's
box
right.
of rocks, all that stuff doesn't have to come in.
I got a great note from Teresa Wallace. She said, this was a great training. I really appreciate hearing how someone else does this. Mind blown. So please, as we end this, guys, please go into that chat group and put information in there that is beneficial to other people. I know I appreciate everybody being on here and listening to it. We want to hear other stuff. This is not the gospel by David Bragg or Shawn Henderson, certainly not the gospel by Ben Townsend. We simply are trying to create a discussion, and I would love for somebody else to come back and say, you know what, I watched that disposition thing. I did bring my prosecuting attorney in, and we've now implemented this process in our city, and it's beginning to make some change. This is where that stuff starts, is having the conversation, learning how other people are doing it, but then sharing your results with other people so that they can benefit by it. And we've got a place to do that now.
And if you've got ideas or something you want to talk about in the next few weeks, especially while we're in the COVID shutdown, email me at shenderson@evidencemanagement.com or email Ben. What's your email?
Ben@trackerproducts.com. They've all gotten emails from me, so they know how to reach me.
Email us, let us know. We want to provide useful content and good information for you. If you'd like to be on a panel, or if you'd like to discuss something, if you'd like to see something discussed, we'll put it out there. I mean, we're going to use this time to its maximum benefit, and whatever we can put out there that's useful, that's made our day worthwhile. So thanks for listening.
We're going to wrap it up. Hey guys, if you have more questions, and I do see more questions coming in, post the questions on the community forum. Let other people answer them. We'll answer them. We're going to keep moderating that thing. Post the questions out there. We'd love to hear them. But for today, thank you very much for your time. You guys were awesome with all the questions. Shawn, thank you for your input. David, always appreciate what you're doing. And the next one's coming up on Friday. So everybody be back 2 o'clock on Friday, and we'll do the next one. Have a great day, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.